Paul Beaver has done a yeoman's job in. He's done. This is not his first time as an author here, but this is Abraham Lincoln in Logan County, Illinois, from 1834 to 1860. Ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls out there in the Etherland, this is interesting reading. It tells about our heritage, and Paul, you spent a considerable amount of time in preparation before starting to put it down in book form. It's a similar, assembling notes, and you tell us how you started to do this, Paul.
Well, it's one of the things I've always wanted to do. Realize that Stringer, who wrote our great county, and this is not a county history. I've had some people ask me about, well, what did you say about this town or that town? I said, if Lincoln wasn't there, I said nothing. But it's not a county history. Where Stringer did a county history, by far, I think, the best county history in the state. But that came out in 1911, which will soon be 100 on the head.
Think of that.
100 years ago. And so many things we found then. I mean, people like E.H. Lukenbill and Hartz, they worked on things and found things. Of course, Jim Hickey, who was one of the great Lincoln historians, and all those things were found. And it is a true story that Betty, my dear friend Betty Hickey, came up to me, and I won't say just when, but it was a very poignant time, and said, now you get these stories down. Said, I was always after Jim to write them all down. Now you get them down. And so I did. And we had a very touching get-together the night. I thanked the people who helped me, because I said, Betty, things like that is what gives you a reason to do it. These stories were out there. We just didn't have them down. They were here and there and everywhere, and like the Scarlet Pimpernel, I guess, And I realized if we didn't put them down, now I realize, too, some of these stories I can't give you 100% proof on. If you've seen the book, you'll know that.
I wanted to ask you about, but go ahead.
Well, I talked to a pretty good authority, our state historian, Tom Swartz, a really brilliant historian, and I went down, and as you saw, he wrote a blurb for the back of the book, a wonderful man, and I said, I've got some concerns, I want to run them by you about some of these stories. He said, you tell them, let the next generation disprove them. Beautiful.
Well,
because we can't do except what if great-granddad said this, I'm going to tell you this is what he said. Did he make it up? Well, surely not everybody who told a story made it up, if they did. So...
Well, that's the interesting thing in your book, Paul, is that you write excerpts or complete passages from folks of that day, and it's intriguing to me how those papers got passed down and happily not destroyed, because they're the depth and the soul of the history of the time. And now we're facing email for the future, and I don't know what's going to happen. I feel for the historians of the future, but I really started with my great-grandfather's letters. Our house, of course, he built it in the 1850s. It still stands out there by Lucas Chapel. And I found all these old letters. I thought they were just fascinating, where they wrote to him about the war and so on. And so I had, other families in Lincoln and Logan County did too. Bill Donath, our Genealogical Society president, collected a lot of them. And we, as you saw in the book, we used them. Yeah, he'd done a magnificent job of compiling the history down there. Without him, boy.
And then there were just, little things like popped up. You and I were talking earlier. The thing to me that I guess liked the best was Robert Todd Lincoln. Well, let's put it back. When our town was founded, we have one account that said Lincoln was there. John Stevens wrote a letter back to Judge Stringer and in 1926 and said, well, I was a little boy and I saw Lincoln christen the town. Well, in 1976 or whatever, I was over to, remember the old Deaconess Nursing Home, which was, it used to be the nurse's home, and then it was a retirement. And a lady was there called Blanche Martin, who I know you know that family. Was my mother's friend, and she asked me to come over one night. She had something to, and I was working at the college, something to show me. And when I got there, first thing she showed me was a gold bracelet that she said her grandfather had given her grandmother. He bought it for her in the city of Atlanta. He was with Sherman's troops. I didn't have the heart to tell her. He probably just reached in a window because there was no one there.
Yeah, broke a window and took it.
And in the meantime, and then she said, I have something for you. And she gave me his promotion papers. He was promoted to lieutenant. He was a doctor at Stones River down at Murfreesboro. And I have those, and you've probably seen them. I bring them out every now and then on display. And just passing, I said, oh, he's named Dr. James Patterson. I said, that's funny. Stringer mentions 3 or 4 people who were present at the christening, and one of them is a Dr. Patterson who came with the load of watermelons out of Middletown. If you remember where Martins lived, and I know you know out on 5th Street there by Robert Fayette. She said, oh, that old story. Well, I just, you might as well just put off all the bells and whistles. I said, what do you mean, that old story?
Yeah.
And she said, oh, I heard that 1,000 times. Well, we got to go back here. What do you mean? Well, my grandmother, his wife, lived with us. All the Martin ladies died at either 95 or 96. Her grandmother, her mother, and her. And she said, I had to take care of her when I was a kid. I got sick and tired of hearing that. She said her grandfather was standing there and saw Lincoln take a melon and christen it. She said the story was they got to teasing him about, well, since all the lots sold, looks like you're going to get paid. And that kind of fits into be a more realistic story because you can see the guys doing that. Hey, well, Bill, you're going to get paid, I guess, for your work. I don't think Lincoln did it on a contingency, but he probably made $20 or $25. And she said he did christen it down. So now we've got the story too, and that was never printed up anyplace. So we put that in the book. And Jim Hickey had long said that he believed that Robert Todd Lincoln, who was 10 years old at the time, was there when Lincoln brought him along from Springfield when the lots were sold that Saturday morning. And Ron he's down in Harrogate, Tennessee, or somewhere down there, or maybe down at the Lincoln birthplace, ran into this one author, and they're talking about it, and the guy said, yeah, I found a little note from Robert Lincoln. You want to use it? Robert Lincoln said in a speech in 1880-something, downtown Lincoln, and he said to the crowd, oh, I remember being here 35 years ago or so when the highest thing standing was a wagon, the sale of lots, wagon full of watermelons. And those things just excite me, that you can add those bits of proof to a story that was told, almost not 100 years ago, but a good time ago. And so those things that's what we wanted people to look at and say, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that.
In this particular book, you had the cooperation, you were aided and abetted by a number of folks in helping compile this, and even the so-called clerk typist, for want of better terminology, Patty, Phil Bertoni, with those nice pictures in this book, and you had Lynn Spellman and proofreaders and a lot of outside help. Credit must be given due to all of those who did help you in there.
Well, Lynn kind of became our commander-in-chief. In some ways, I talked to Ron about this, and Phil too. This seems silly. In some ways, the writing, just taking the pad of paper and writing down your thoughts, was the easiest. It's checking them what drives you crazy. And Lynn was wonderful. She, of course, had taught at Lincoln College. She's an expert in this area. And I told her, I was kidded her. I said, I was going to get you a T-shirt, and I ran out of time, which said, "The comma goes here." And when she said it that way, it did go there. There was no disagreement. There was none of this, no pulling rank.
I'm sorry to comment that I don't think we've had enough of that in our school systems today. The comma goes here.
Well, she was in charge.
Teaching grammar, per se, is an art. And unfortunately, kind of a dying art unless you want to be.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The writing it in a way, of course, doing the research. Then once you wrote it, then you had to go back and check. And I was very fortunate. When I started to do this, I asked Ron if he'd help, and of course he's teaching full time, and he said he would like to do the chapter. When I decided what was going to be in each chapter, he'd like to do the one on the politics. I think it's a great chapter he wrote. And then Phil Bertoni, I asked him to do Pulaski, but sometimes what's that statement? The statement, you ought to be better lucky than good.
Yeah.
Well, I find out Phil Bertoni not only can write a great chapter in Pulaski, he is an expert with the computer. He had taught computers 20-some years in the high-quality California school. So he gets the format to do book-top publishing, laptop, or what they call desktop publishing.
Mm-hmm.
He puts it in his computer. He teaches himself how to do it, or we wouldn't have had this yet. But then there were, things from the past that were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Latham got the date of the christening wrong.
Really?
And I'll tell you why. Because I went back and tried to find out how could this guy who was there made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out when that book was written, 78 History of Logan County, which is our first one, which the company came in from Chicago. They were doing it in all the counties, and they'd say, well, who do we see in Macon County? Who do we talk to in Sangamon? They get one person, maybe two in a big county, and who do we talk to in Logan County? Well, Robert B. Latham. So they just did a morning's work with him, I think. And they asked him, if you look at that history, it's mostly boilerplate, up to and then you get a little bit on Lincoln, Logan County. And I'm sure they asked him, well, when was the town founded? When did you christen it? And he said, well, I don't know, August 29th or somewhere, and they were close. Well, they didn't bother. Nobody checked.
Nobody checked anything.
And they could have checked, but it was much more difficult in those days. You know how we checked it? We have computers.
Yeah.
Ron Keller and I went down, and Phil Bertoni, we went down to Springfield, brought up all the newspapers. There are 2 papers in Springfield, one in Decatur, one in Bloomington, plainly said on Saturday, August 27th, the lots are sold in Lincoln. But I can see how that's done. We had a couple other places in the book where your memory, it's hard to remember.
You can ask my wife that.
Well, you can remember an event. You don't remember the event. There are certain things that, like in war, the guys remember exactly what happened. You say, well, when did that happen? They may not even get the year right. It's just, that's our memory does that.
But they say that even if something happened now that we all foresaw, we'd each have just a tad of a different spin on it. So it depends on who you talk to. And as far as dates are concerned, I'm not very good at that. So I can understand Mr. Latham.
Well, I told for years, there was a tornado when I was a kid that killed a couple out on 5th Street. Remember, in fact, where our farm is today, wherever Sat Peacock lives, it killed that family. And I remember coming by there that morning, next morning, I saw an ice box. And a real ice box, not a refrigerator. And dead chickens and what was left of the barn. That's all. And it was pretty frightening. And I always believed that tornado had come through at night and killed those people. And I'd have written that way until I ran into my buddy Harold Eimer, who lived down the road. And we were talking about it. Harold says, what are you talking about? That was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know, because my dad was holding the horses and me by the other hand, and we were watching it in that house. Now, the tornado occurred. It did kill the people. My date's wrong. My time's wrong.
Yeah.
And so,
my time is wrong too. If we don't get a commercial in here, Rudy Bob would say, "My time is your time." Right, ready, Jim?